Holy moly, what's going on over there? Hi, Facebook live stream listeners. You are backstage at Change It Up with Paula Shaw Radio. Thank you for joining us today because we have a really important show today, something I am passionate about. We're going to be talking about the tragedy of human sex trafficking, how this happens, who it's happening to, and does it exist right here in San Diego. And joining me today will be Bianca Morales-Egan, correct? Mm-hmm. Duck your head in here for a minute, Bianca. She'll be coming on very shortly. But she is here doing some amazing work with PCI Global, and she'll tell you more about that shortly. So thank you for being part of this today, and let's all get the facts straight today so we can make a difference for a lot of kids in need. All right. We're good? We're good to go. All right. Okay, Bianca, if you'll hit that little button. Okay. Okay. Welcome to Change It Up with Paula Shaw Radio. I am so delighted to have you here today. We are going to be talking about the horror of human trafficking. And our show is being brought to you today, as always, by Sherry Blair, the financial consultant who is empowering women to grow beautiful financial futures. She can be reached at 619-997-0416 or at sherryblair.com, spelled CHERIBLAIR.com. So welcome to Change It Up Radio. We are all about change. We're all about getting out of the rut that so many of us are stuck in and trying to do something different. Change it up. Make it different. Make it new. You know, we humans have a love-hate relationship with change. We need it or we'll be bored to death, but we hate the discomfort of it. And yet, all growth happens outside of our comfort zones. So our goal here at Change It Up Radio is to bring you information to help make change easier and more productive so that you can learn to embrace it. Because one of the things we know is change is one of the few constants that exists out there. So we might as well learn to love it and embrace it and have some fun doing it together. So today, at Change It Up Radio, we are talking about something very, very serious and something that, in my opinion, is absolutely horrific, and that is human trafficking. I want to give you some facts so that you can actually get a better understanding of what human trafficking is and the level on which it exists. Because I think so many of us think people caught up in sex trafficking either or like those girls we saw in that movie Taken with Liam Neeson, where they were kidnapped and drugged and then forced to do that kind of thing. Or we think that they're doing it because they choose to, because it's a way to earn money that sometimes runaway girls or troubled kids seem to turn to. But there's a very, very dark story behind this. And I think it's really important that we all know the real facts, because otherwise we can't effectively help our children. And I am talking about our children. The average ages of kids that get caught up in this, both boys and girls, are between 12 and 16. Those are children. In my work, as a life transition expert and coach and therapist, one of the things that's always really been heartbreaking for me is when I'll have a 15 or a 16-year-old who's having problems at home, maybe difficulties with their parents. Their lives are just grim from their perspective. They're usually having trouble at school. And when I'm working with a child like this, especially if they're having suicidal thoughts, what breaks my heart is that I know they haven't lived long enough to know that there is a dawn after a dark night, that things can change and great things can happen in a very, very short time. They haven't lived long enough to realize that. So sometimes in the dark moments, they do desperate things that are really heartbreaking. The other thing about kids that age is they're very black and white thinkers. It's either this or it's that. There's not a lot of room in between. So parents, if you're having problems with a child that age, you know, I'm not saying don't worry. I'm saying get help. But just know that in a way, you can't do anything right when you've got a troubled child that age, because you're either in or you're out with them. If you have a great relationship with your teenager, good for you. I was blessed with getting to have that kind of a relationship with my kids most of the time. Of course, there were times when I thought I knew nothing and I was the worst person on the planet and they wanted nothing to do with me. But on the whole, I was so blessed that we had great relationships. So the other thing about kids this age is they're extremely vulnerable. They think they know everything, but they really don't. And that's part of how they get sucked into this human trafficking that Bianca is going to teach us more about in just a little bit. But let me give you a few more facts. San Diego is on the FBI's list as one of the top 13 highest sex trafficking areas in the country. Sex trafficking is San Diego's second largest underground economy after drug trafficking. The underground sex economy represents an estimated $810 million a year in revenue. As I've already mentioned, 15 years old is the average age of a child who is involved in this. At least 110 gangs are involved in the commercial exploitation of people. 85% of pimps and sex trafficking facilitators interviewed were gang involved. Those who are vulnerable to fall victims of sex trafficking, 55% of them are homeless and 28% in foster care. So yes, sometimes it's these kids whose lives already feel like they're hopeless and grim, and they get caught up in this. There are approximately 20 to 30 million slaves, and that's the word we're using for these people because they are not doing what they're doing willingly. 20 to 30 million in the world today. The average age a teenager enters the sex trade is as young as 11 to 13, 14, 15, and 16. Many of the victims are runaway girls who were sexually abused as children. They span, this is one of the things I recently learned that really pretty much blew me away. They span every socioeconomic level. This is something Bianca will be telling us more about shortly. But even in the best schools, there are victims of human sex trafficking. And the story of how that happens is one that was absolutely shocking to me, incredibly upsetting and moving. And that's why I asked Bianca to be on our show today, because we need educating about this. Because our children, because we're at a certain socioeconomic level, does not mean we're immune. Every kid who's troubled or vulnerable is a potential victim of this human trafficking. And here's something that's really important. Traffickers are increasingly using social networking apps and sites to target and recruit children. Oftentimes, what I learned recently through this wonderful woman who's going to be talking to us shortly is that a child starts a dialogue online on one of the social media sites with someone who seems like a friend, who seems like they understand what the child is going through. They develop a relationship. So this child really thinks, oh, somebody gets it. You know, this person is really my friend. And then sometimes it takes a kind of a romantic turn. And that's where the trouble really begins. Because then if this child is having problems with her parents, this facilitator, as they call them, can encourage her to run away. He can tell her that he's going to rescue her and take her away. And unfortunately, this problem is not exclusive just to girls. It's primarily girls, but boys are also being taken prisoner in this human trafficking. So what we're looking at here is a tragic situation. And I know a lot of you listening are going, how could any human being ever enslave another human being and force them to do something? And why don't the kids go to the police? Why don't they tell a teacher what's happening? Well, there's a really dire reason why they aren't. And that's something we're going to learn about very shortly from Bianca. But this is not something where these kids are at choice. They are being threatened. They are scared, most of them. And there's very little out there that's available to help them turn this around. And then, of course, you know, in the world, there are also people who are being trafficked into jobs where they are basically slaves. So this is a huge problem. And PCI Global, which is the nonprofit that Bianca works for, they are headquartered here in San Diego, and they have a mission to end hunger, enhance health, and overcome hardship to the world's most vulnerable populations. They are doing this beautiful work, and after this break, I am so looking forward to introducing you to Bianca Morales-Egan, who is one of the champions of PCI Global. And she's going to teach us a lot about what we can do to help prevent human trafficking. And we'll be right back. All right, darling, if you can push that red button. And then if you can push the white one and the red one. Okay, then let's slide you over here. And you know what? I'm just going to get, excuse me, live streamers. I'm going to make sure that you can see Bianca in her chair. Yeah, that's perfect.
Good. Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to start with your bio, and then we'll start chatting.
Sounds good.
Okay. Oh, and you just want to be sure that this is about, so we want the mic not to be in front of your face, but when you look at me, you'll want it here so that you don't actually turn away from the mic. Okay. Yeah, so you might, and it'll go where you want it to go.
Okay.
Sorry,
that's okay.
Pull your hair. Okay.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
Great.
Would you hit that green button? Okay. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio with Paula Shaw. I am here in this segment with, as promised, the wonderful Bianca Morales-Egan. Let me tell you just a little bit about her. She earned her bachelor's degree in international relations from the University of San Diego and a master's of arts in international development with an emphasis on women in development from American University in Washington, D.C. She has a diverse experience in international development and humanitarian field, including coordinating a program to build self-esteem in Liberian refugee girls, serving as a peace writer for USD's Kroc Institute of Peace and Justice, Women Peacemaker program. She's also working with international research departments who serve victims of police torture. Since 2009, she's worked at Project Concern International, PCI, serving as both the manager of field operations and more recently as PCI's technical advisor for human trafficking and gender equity. She is the director of PCI's human trafficking prevention initiatives in San Diego County, including the Girls Only and Boys Only youth prevention programs and the CEASE, C-E-A-S-E, San Diego Network, an effort to reduce the demand for illegal commercial sex. She is a very busy woman. She's out there fighting the good fight, and I am very excited to introduce her to you today. Bianca, welcome.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
I am so delighted to have you here. So as I shared with our live stream listeners a little bit ago, last week I heard you speak at my Rotary meeting, and I was so moved by this problem and by the work that you do. I just felt that we needed to get you on this show and start educating people about what's going on. So tell us first a little bit about PCI Global.
Sure, yeah, thank you. So PCI, Project Concern International, was founded here in San Diego in 1961. So we've been around for quite a while, have our roots here right in San Diego. And we're founded by a physician, Dr. Jim Turpin, who volunteered his time in San Diego and across the border in Tijuana, and out of that found a passion and love for service and started Project Concern. And so we've been around and had some deep roots here in San Diego, and our mission, as you mentioned, is to enhance health, end hunger, overcome hardship, and we've added a fourth, which is empower her, to really focus on gender equality and gender empowerment and empowerment of women and girls.
Great.
Yes, so that's part of our main mission. So we, and then the anti-trafficking work really has been focused so far domestically here in San Diego. And really it was brought about, I say, as a water cooler conversation between a few passionate folks of ours at PCI looking at, this is happening in our own backyard. Sure, we work in 17 different countries around the world, in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and like I said, right here in San Diego, but really saw this as something that was happening here, and we had a few dedicated board members and staff and leadership team members that thought, we really should take a look at this issue in San Diego.
So how big a problem is it? I mean, I just gave some statistics, but are we, and I saw we were 13th in the nation. Is that because we're a border city, or what is the problem?
Yeah, good
what
question.
Are we doing wrong in San Diego?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not a great list to be on, but we were on the top, the FBI's top 13 cities, and one of the top 13 cities for high intensity of prostitution of children, which is really sex trafficking of children. And so, unfortunately, being a part of the border or along the border is part of it. But according to the study where you read some of the stats from earlier, that was done by Point Loma Nazarene and USD, Dr. Jamie Gates and Dr. Amy Carpenter, that study showed that the prevalence, they think, is around 3,000 to 8,000 victims per year here in San Diego. So an average of 5,000 victims of sexual exploitation, commercial sexual exploitation in San Diego alone. And 80% of those were domestic victims, so Americans, people born here in the United States. And a lot of people have a misconception about human trafficking, thinking it's smuggling or you have to cross a border, but that's not necessarily true. It's really more about the relationship between the exploiter and the victim. Having that someone using somebody else for exploitation to make money, in essence. So unfortunately, like you're saying, San Diego is at one of the hot spots. We are along the border, and trafficking does happen on both sides. So there's Americans that are brought across the border trafficked, and then there's folks from other countries that are brought into the United States and then trafficked when they get here. But it's really about that exploitation. And so and we also know that the average age of entry is 16 years old, another fact that came out of that study. So unfortunately, it is a problem here in San Diego. And we're a tourist spot. So whenever there's a tourist destination, there's going to be more demand, which, as we know, human trafficking is a supply and a demand issue. The supply being the victims, of course, and those who are exploited, and then the demand being the buyers.
So I was mentioning in the first segment that we tend to think of these victims as either someone who was kidnapped and maybe now is being drugged and doing this because they're drugged, or someone who's making this choice, thinking this is a cool way to earn money.
Sure.
Tell us the reality. Who are these people really?
Yeah, really good question. So by law, anybody under the age of 18 that's involved in commercial sex is considered a human trafficking victim. So legally, we have those definitions.
Okay.
So anybody under 18, that's in commercial sex or prostitution, again, you don't have to prove the force, fraud, and coercion, which is the 3 terms we use for trafficking and to prove that a trafficking situation is happening.
Can you say those again?
Sure. Force, fraud, and coercion.
And coercion. Okay.
So something by force, as you mentioned earlier, is like taken, or where they're actually kidnapped, physically forced, confined to an area, and forced to do an act. And that does happen. It does.
Okay.
But the vast majority are doing it because they're being defrauded of some sort. So maybe if they're foreign born, their papers are taken away, they're forced to do a job, and are, or they have pictures taken of them that they then use the trafficker as, I'll take these to your family, or expose these pictures to other people. So they're being defrauded in that sense.
And what's the word? They're being threatened.
Right. Threatened through physical or psychological, threat. But coercion's that third term that we use probably most often, where the trafficker or exploiter will really spend that time to get to know their victim, so they can use those things against them, that personal private information or vulnerability that person has, and coerce them into doing it. And one of the main methods we see, especially with children, is that coercion and that partnering or boyfriending or experience, where they actually will become a boyfriend-girlfriend situation or a partner, a romantic partnership, and then the exploiter will use that relationship and that false promise of love and that, knowing all along what they were going to do with their victim, but they have much greater psychological control over that victim than when they're using love, unfortunately, as their weapon. Especially for those who are vulnerable or lonely or isolated. I have a 15-year-old daughter, so some of the things you said at the top of the show really resonate. They're going through those transitions. They are vulnerable. So having someone offer them friendship, love, knowing everything about them, understanding,
right? Someone who listens.
Exactly, is probably more powerful than force, because they have a situation of more Stockholm syndrome, or they're in love with their trafficker, which is a much harder thing to break.
And does the trafficker keep that relationship going then until maybe the girl says, I don't want to do this anymore, and then does it turn ugly? So, in some of these cases, do these girls really believe they're doing something for this guy that loves them?
Yeah, unfortunately they do. And so they will do it thinking, under that false pretense of love. But even then, when they are in this life, they call it the life, the situation is pretty dire. Having to perform commercial sex acts on multiple people, mostly men, statistically, every day, and just being exposed to violence and disease and those kind of things, it's not a healthy life, put it that way, at the very least. And but then at that point, they're in a cycle of maybe depression or shame. And we see shame as being, again, one of those key tools used by an exploiter, saying, I'm going to tell everybody about this, or I know exactly about everything about you, and, use that against them. So they do, unfortunately, become, imprisoned in that shame. And
the shame and the fear, I would imagine, are huge.
Yeah.
And that's a big tool, because especially, I would imagine a lot of these girls, even if they've run away from home, even if they had problems with their parents, from my experiences in working with teenagers, they still love them. They still want it to be right. They want it to get better. But now if that parent should find out that they've been prostituting themselves, I'm sure they're deathly afraid that somebody would find that out. And then there's no way to fix it. Right? There's no way my mother's going to love me again if she knows I've done this.
Exactly. Yeah. And unfortunately, the exploiter will re-emphasize that.
Yes.
And so it's sad. I always think about my own kids and say, even if even if something does happen to you, always come to me, no matter what, you know.
That's so huge. I think before we go to break, just let's reiterate that. Tell your children they can always come to you no matter what they've done. We'll talk some more with Bianca Morales-Egan about human trafficking when we come back. Okay. Yeah, perfect. You got those buttons down. She has got that. This is the clock for those of you who are watching us on live stream. There's a show clock here, and Bianca's being gracious enough to push the buttons for me so we can stay on track. All right, so when we come back, let's talk a little bit about what are other pieces. This piece we just talked about, I think, is huge, how they keep them enslaved. I know what I'm curious about, like what's the average length of time someone stays involved in this, and let's get into how you help and what you really are trying to do here. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Ready?
You can. I'm just going to grab a quick sip of water. Okay. Welcome back to Change It Up with Paula Shaw Radio. We are talking about human sex trafficking today. And in studio with me is Bianca Morales-Egan, who is working with PCI Global. And they are an organization that is really, really out there in the whole world trying to end human suffering in so many different areas. But her job particularly concerns working with the victims of human sex trafficking. So, Bianca, welcome back.
Thank you.
So happy you're here today because, as we said earlier, it's important to educate everybody about the realities of this, right? These are not girls who thought prostitution might be a way to earn some extra money. These are not girls who are doing this really by choice. As Bianca was just explaining to us, so often they've been sold a bill of goods by a, what do you call them, exploiter? An exploiter who actually developed a relationship with them online and then at some point met. Sometimes we've heard stories of girls who, after a terrible fight with a parent, then runs away with this exploiter. And before they know it, he's asking them to do sexual favors for him, not for him, but
commercially.
Commercially, yes. And then the cycle begins. Bianca, is there like an average length of time that a child stays involved in this life?
Yeah, I don't know if there's an average length of time. I do know that, you know, the average lifespan of somebody who's in the life is about 7 years.
Really?
Yeah.
You mean they actually can get killed?
Right. So, and the highest rates, so if someone starts when they're 15 or 16, like the average age, then they're statistically more likely to die by the time they're 22, 23, because of the violence, suicide, disease, other things that are just within, you know, that lifestyle, if you call it that. So unfortunately, the life expectancy isn't very long. It is a very dangerous thing to be in.
Oh my God, that's horrible. That's a whole piece of this tragedy I didn't even realize.
Right. Yeah. No, it's it's very sad.
And do the exploiters, do they house and feed and
they
how
offer,
many people can they have?
Well, according to that study, I think that on average, and during that study, they actually went into prisons to interview former gang members, pimps, traffickers, and I think on average they would have 2 to 3 people under them working for them. And
living in separate dwellings?
It depends, but I think that sometimes, it would be within this, what they call a stable. So they would have girls or and it happens to boys as well, and transgender folks. So don't want to exclude that. But they would have those that they're exploiting, you know, within that household. They travel around quite a bit for obvious reasons, not to be caught. You know, they could go from hotel room to hotel room, from city to city. They could be within a residential brothel as well, but I think more likely to be traveling around. And in that study as well, they said that an average trafficker or facilitators, they call it in the study, would make about $760,000 a year on the backs of those 2 to 3 people they're exploiting.
Really? Mm-hmm. So they must be asking them to do many multiple sex acts in the course of one day.
They can be, definitely multiple a day. They would have to fill a quota, to make sure they're bringing in enough money and be punished if they don't bring in that quota. So definitely keeping them, in that lifestyle and bringing in drugs and other dependencies to make sure that they're staying within that. So not just the psychological, but the physical.
Oh, I see.
So
they are sometimes giving them drugs. And what do you think is the biggest deterrent that keeps this child living in this tortured life from going to the police or trying to get help?
A lot of it is just that relationship they think they have with that, that they are offering them protection, that they are offering some sort of a relationship.
I see.
And in that shame of going to police or thinking, and traffickers are very good at saying no one's going to believe you. You stay with me because no one's going to believe you. Similar to sexual abuse of children and feeding in those lies that no one's going to trust you, no one's going to believe you, you're not worthy, you can't go back now because what are you going to go back to? So that shame, and many victims do not self-identify, which is why it's so important for us community members to know what the signs are and identifying somebody who may be trafficked, whether that's school, or at, within the community, coffee shops, things like that, that you see those signs and you're able to report, because a lot of times they don't self-identify because of those reasons. Because
of the shame and everything.
Because of the shame and the brainwashing, really, under their exploiter.
I would imagine, too, just thinking about kids I've ever worked with in my therapy practice, they already have low self-esteem, or maybe they've been abused in growing up. And then after time of doing this, add the shame and the guilt and all of the other negative feelings onto it.
Right.
Then they would be, I can see, far more vulnerable and easy to manipulate if you know the right kinds of things to say and you're that kind of person.
Yep, unfortunately. And it is a huge moneymaker, unfortunately, which drives, I think, the exploiters and traffickers. But just, being under that pressure and that vulnerable state. And, there's a high, suicide attempt rate and suicide rate amongst this population because of that.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah. Especially, they must reach a state of such despair.
Right.
Once they realize this person doesn't really love them, that they are being used, and then they just take in the full scope of what they've done and what they've exposed themselves to. I would imagine the despair is huge. And very often when people are that overwhelmed and despairing, suicide does look like the only option. So what can we do? What are you doing? What is PCI trying to do to change this problem?
Well, we, as having our foundings in health and humanitarian assistance, primary prevention is something that we've done for a while. And we actually did an assessment here in San Diego in 2013 and wanted to just learn about the landscape of who's doing what here in San Diego, because we do know that there's great activists and people out there, researchers I've mentioned already. Mauricio Ugarte is a huge pioneer here, and Generate Hope, and a lot of great organizations that are doing good work with victims, and we have a great district attorney, Summer Steffen, who's been doing great work for a long time too, and pioneering this in San Diego. So we knew there's some great people and activists and champions out there. So we wanted to see where, given our capacity and knowledge, could PCI really fit in. And so primary prevention is what we thought there's a need here, and we've been doing that for a while. We think we could help out. So we've been focusing on really trying to prevent victims from becoming victims in the first place, prevent traffickers from becoming traffickers, if we could do that, and prevent buyers from becoming buyers. So we've worked on those 3 angles for the past 5 years or so, and starting with that, preventing victims from becoming victims.
And how are you doing that? Are you going into schools, or what are you doing?
We are. So we've partnered with Boys and Girls Clubs here in San Diego, and as well as San Diego Unified School District, to pilot and implement programs that are focused on the higher risk kids, and knowing that, while it can happen in any county or any part of the county, in any district, there are some zones that are higher prevalence as far as recruitment.
I see.
So looking at some of those zones for starters, and just offering a group mentoring program for those that may have trouble at home, may be in foster care, may not have a stable home life, but we know they're the most vulnerable.
Yes.
So just talking about staying safe on social media. What are healthy boundaries with your body, and what are healthy relationships, and how can you be assertive without being aggressive? And just starting with girls. How can we do it that's in an age appropriate way, but talk about this issue so they don't fall victim to this, and really talking about those red flags on, again, how to stay safe on social media. Don't give out private information. Know when someone's trying to coerce you into doing something that you don't want to do, and have a safe, trusting adult that you can go to and identify them. So since from the girls, we've also started a boys program as a counterpart to that. And so working with boys on prevention as well. We know boys are victims, but unfortunately we know that boys can be perpetrators or buyers. Right. And how do we set that foundation, again, at a young 8 to 12-year-old range of, what is equality, and what does privilege mean, and, how can we be kind and empathetic to others, understand the situation that they're in, and dealing with our own emotions, because we know emotional regulation is tough for those kids, especially that have had an unstable home life. And so try to give them that base and a role model in that group, and a mentor that they can go to. And we've seen great results in that, as far as...
I think that's huge.
Yeah, teachers and creating more of an accepting environment, school connectedness.
That getting the schools involved, I think, is probably huge, because I know I was very naive about how this all happens. So I can imagine most children would certainly not have the kind of knowledge that we've been discussing today.
Right.
So let me ask you a question. Bianca, if some of our listeners want to help, can they donate money to PCI Global?
Sure, they can go to our website, pciglobal.org, /trafficking, human trafficking. And so we have the prevention programming that we do focus on, and always, love the support for that.
Right.
And there's also great ways to just get involved. If I'm also on the advisory council for human trafficking for San Diego County.
And you know what? That get involved piece is exactly where I want to pick up when we come back from the break. As I'm sure there are many people who would like to do that. Yeah. We will be right back. All right.
Great.
Okay, if you're ready, let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll just go right into that. How can they help?
Sounds good.
And then let me just grab my little wrap-up piece here. Oops, that's you. Use this one. Okay. All right.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome back to Change It Up with Paula Shaw Radio. We are talking about human trafficking today, and in studio with me is Bianca Morales-Egan, who is doing some incredible work to try to save our children, to try to educate them so that they will not fall victims to human sex trafficking. So when we just went to the break, she was about to tell us how people can get involved, how they can help. Of course, there's donating money. So you can go to PCI Global /human trafficking. Is that right?
Yeah.
And if you would like to donate money to help these programs that she is working with. And what else can people do if they want to get involved?
Yeah, and we're also part of a prevention collective. So we're working with No More. It's a theatrical reenactment that can show students kind of what that looks like to be recruited and how they can be an upstander to the issue. So
fabulous. What is the name of that group?
No More. So it's
No More.
As in KNOWMORE out of Point Loma Nazarene University. We also partner with a group called Protect, or Three Strands Global. Protect and
second Wednesday of the month.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And then also we have our community. So I co-chair a community subcommittee, which is a group of nonprofits, faith-based organizations, community members that are concerned and just wanting to learn more. So we have a different speaker or topic every month, so people can really see where they want to get engaged, because it's a huge, hairy problem, and many different ways. And maybe sometimes going straight to victim services or working with survivors isn't for everybody, because it's an intense, there's a big rehabilitation process there. And PTSD and trauma, informed care is needed and things like that. But lots of other
therapists and counselors that volunteer their time to help.
There has been for some of the victim service organizations. I think that, and they have case managers at those organizations. North County Lifeline's another one, Alabaster Jar. There's a few around Salvation Army that really offer that intensive case management and offer then a network of different, from how they need, there's a lot of needs as far as housing, psychological needs, medical needs, dental needs, childcare needs, transportation. I mean, you can imagine. Wow. I remember one survivor saying that I think she required 16 different services as part of her rehabilitation, process. So it's a very intense process. And again, there are great survivor groups out there and victim service groups that are working with them.
I was going to ask you that. So if, let's say, a child who is engaged in being trafficked decides they're going to take the risk, whether this person's going to expose them or shame them or whatever, they cannot do this any longer and they don't want to commit suicide, who do they go to? Who's the first person they should go to?
Typically, one, I'd like to just put out the hotline number out there for anybody, because some people do self-identify through that, but that is easy to remember, 888-3737-888. 888-3737. 888.
888.
Right.
Okay. That is easy to remember. 888-3737-888. And this is a hotline for victims if they want to try to get help,
or anybody. And if you're a community member that sees something that looks fishy, you see a girl that we've had even like Uber drivers or airline flight attendants who have recognized the signs. Someone that looks like they're being controlled by somebody else, someone that maybe exhausted, may have some bruising, may be tattooed in a certain way, with a barcode or a diamond or a crown or something just doesn't look right. Just kind of, you can see that something isn't okay with this relationship. Young people that are with maybe an older boyfriend. But, putting those pieces together, several of those red flags together and saying, this doesn't look right. You can call the hotline number and they'll walk you through, okay, what are you seeing? Where's your location? And they will, if they do think it's a suspected case, they will contact our local law enforcement task force. And so we are fortunate here in San Diego. We have a task force that's just dedicated to human trafficking of law enforcement officials.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah. So, and they're fantastic. So I highly encourage anybody that sees something. One other big issue we have here in San Diego is massage businesses. So there are illicit massage businesses as well. And estimated 200 here in San Diego. Wow. And a lot of those victims come from Asian countries, are brought here with the false premise of a job or an opportunity, and then enslaved or forced to work, both labor and sex trafficking. So if you see something funny, related to that, you can call the hotline number, and again, they'll open a case number, and you can follow up on that case number if you see something else or you see that again.
And that number again is 888-3737-888.
Yeah, exactly.
So there is some place, there are many services in place, I see, and organizations trying to help the victims of this. But what I love about what you're doing is you're trying to give kids the information before they become victims.
That's correct. Yeah.
And give them that help. I know, I mean, we all know being a teenager is a tough time in life. It's tough on the parents and it's tough on the kids. There's so much going on hormonally. There's all the pressure, the peer pressure, and all, I want to be as cool as the coolest kid and all that stuff. And excuse me. So, it's a really vulnerable time. And I think that if I'm sitting in an assembly and I'm 15 years old and I've been maybe having some kind of a conversation with a guy online, thinking we're starting to fall in love, and I'm craving love because maybe my parents are abusive, really, or maybe I'm just having a terrible relationship with them, so it's not real loving and warm because we argue all the time. If I were at that assembly hearing you sharing information about how these things can evolve, whoa, my eyes are now open that I may be in the middle of something just like that. So I am so delighted that people like you are out there trying to help these kids. And like you said, any school is potentially a site for an exploiter to find somebody, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like it's not, there are no boundaries really as far as neighborhoods, especially because they can be contacting that young person in their bedroom on their phone.
Exactly.
It's which doesn't have any boundaries or lines online. So we've heard recruitment happening from North County all the way to South Bay, East County, Central San Diego, even La Jolla. I tell the story about one of our task force commanders that said, was speaking to one of the traffickers or pimps and said, what do you do to recruit girls? And he sat outside a Jamba Juice in the La Jolla area, just waiting for that girl that was most disgruntled with her parents, let's say, and listening for those conversations, and then befriended her. And so, I mean, it can happen anywhere. We do know that the most vulnerable are those who are the most vulnerable. So those who are runaway or homeless or foster care and may not have that protection, those protections at home. But like you're saying, any adolescent, with their brain not being fully developed, I think to their 20s now, can have that and not make those rational decisions or take those risks that could have consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank goodness that there are people like you, Bianca, and PCI Global, and so many other organizations. So, again, let's give this hotline number. It's 888-3737-888. And Bianca, if they want just more information about PCI Global or about you and what you're doing, how can they reach you, or where would they get that information?
Well, I think our website.
And the website is?
That is PCI Global, all one word, .org. And I'm happy to, again, my name is Bianca Morales-Egan, and I'm happy to, take any emails as well if people, which is a long email address, but bmorales-egan at pciglobal.org. And we
Say
do
that again.
Yeah, sorry, it's fast. B as in Bianca, Morales, Morales -Egan, EGAN at pciglobal.org. And we give trainings or just awareness presentations to anybody in the community that, at no charge, but that wants it. So just wanting to spread the word about the issue. And we've done businesses, we've done churches,
service
community
clubs,
groups, service clubs,
yes.
Right, exactly. Just because we do want to spread the awareness, have people know what the red flags are. And we're also galvanizing the business community. So we're starting a business alliance against trafficking as well. So we think businesses have a lot to offer to this as well.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us today and for teaching us so much and all the beautiful work you do.
Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners. We are here on KCBQ at 7 o'clock on Saturday and Sunday evenings. You can also hear Change It Up Radio on all the major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Libsyn, Omni, and SoundCloud. We're on 15 terrestrial radio stations across the country, iHeartRadio, Blog Talk, And if you can't remember any of those things, just ask Alexa. But please also look for us at changeitupradio.com. You can find this show there and any notes about PCI Global and Bianca's work. We also have a Facebook page. Please find us on Change It Up Radio Facebook page and like us. And let us know what you want to hear about. We are open to hearing what topics you'd like us to discuss on this show. And also check us out on Instagram. Again, Change It Up Radio. So thank you so much for joining us. Oh, and by the way, if you want any further information about me, you can get that at paulashaw.com. That's paulashaw.com. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. All righty. Thank you, my dear.
Thank you.
That was wonderful.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I love this work you're doing.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to remember pictures.
Okay.
First, let me end this. Oops. I'll say. And thank you,
Goodbye.
live streamers, for being with us.